harmony,
community,
wholeness,
looking, observing,
the entirety of our experience,
listening,
moving forward and creating the new earth.
constant adjustment,
Ultimately, we're all looking for the same thing.
and tuning our experience.
as the totality of this divine essence.
Hello and welcome to Truth Be Told, another episode. Here we are. It is the end of December. This is the last one for the month, and you know how much we enjoy being here. So thank you for watching. Tonight, it is the last one for celebrating 31 expressions of light. So these are the final 3 picks that made the cut for each of us. We're going to share those with you, share some of our takes on it, just dive deep into this idea of we are the light, everything is made of the light, and how do we celebrate that and experience more of the wonderfulness of that light in our world? So sit back, enjoy, Truth Be Told.
Continuing to uncover the light, I thought in this segment we could talk about one of my favorite words. Kind of feel like I say that about all the words, but this one I think is true. Anyway, this week I thought we could talk about harmony, because as a musician, harmony is super important. I think most people tend to think of harmony as in like peace and harmony and everyone getting along and being absolutely perfect, and that sounds really nice. In the musical context, harmony is really when we have a combination of different frequencies. It doesn't really matter what those frequencies are. Some might sound more pleasant than others, but technically speaking, any combination of frequency is harmony. So anytime you take more than one pitch and play them at the same time, you're creating harmony. And I think in our creative minds, it's those kind of chord progressions, the basic chord progressions in a major key, 1 4 5 1. That's kind of when we think harmony. It's like seeing harmony out in the world would be a visualization of that chord progression, and yet harmony in music is so much more than that, is so much more complicated than that, and I think harmony in real life would be the same thing. There is so much listening involved while you are playing, and you're making constantly minute adjustments based on the key you're in, the instruments you're playing along with, and what notes you're playing, what note you're playing in that chord, in that harmony. We have to make constant adjustments to make those notes and those chords and those harmonies sound the way they do. I think if we apply that same approach to harmony, that same understanding of harmony to life, peace and harmony actually becomes a totally different thing. What would it look like to have peace and harmony from the musician's understanding, to have peace and harmony out in the world? I think it would take constant adjustment on all of our parts. See, it's not peace and harmony like everything is pre-tuned and it's just going to show up in a peaceful way. But peace, harmony in the real world, harmony in front of us, harmony as an expression of light, requires us to show up in a way where we are constantly listening, looking, observing, and tuning our experience to that which is around us. So it's not as if life just shows up perfectly. It's that we get to show up actively. Harmony is an active way of being. The other really cool thing about harmony is that the frequencies that make up harmony actually all come down to rhythm. It's all about rhythm. If we look at any frequency, a note, a pitch is just a wave. And depending on the length of that wave, it creates different frequencies. And so the shorter the wave, the higher the frequency. But if we slow that down, we find it's all rhythm. The beat of that wave, if we slow it down, slow it down, slow it down, slow it down, you actually begin to hear the beat of the wave. And so harmony becomes combining different rhythms. Usually the rhythm is so fast because it becomes a singular pitch. We hear it as a singular pitch. The rhythm becomes so fast we don't hear a distinguishable rhythm. But I think the same thing is true in life. We are all living at our own rhythm, our own rhythmic vibration in a way. Our life, our experience, our routines kind of have a rhythm to them. And so when our rhythm bumps up against somebody else's rhythm, we have what we call dissonance. Now, dissonance exists in music. It's still harmony. Dissonance is still harmony. Harmony is not just all of the pretty chords with the perfect intervals and the major thirds and minor thirds, but harmony is also the clashing of half steps, the clashing of major seconds, right? These notes that are close together and kind of create this crunchy texture. But it is actually the dissonance in the music that makes it move toward anything else at all. And so it is the dissonance and then the resolution of that dissonance that actually brings us what we commonly think of as harmony, but is actually simply just resolution, that all of these chords are creating harmony. And that same thing applies in all of our lives, that things that look like dissonance doesn't mean we're not living in harmony. It just means it's moving us to resolve into something that is much more appealing. Harmony, as an expression of light, is actually an activity. It is something that we must actively participate in that moves us all forward.
You know what stood out to me was when you talked about the minor adjustments. That it's not just these minor adjustments, that it's not just there and it's all, working perfectly as we think it should. But isn't that like how life is? It's like these minor adjustments, like constantly looking, constantly listening, constantly observing, and constantly not only like observing out, but like observing like our own inner landscape and just making those adjustments.
Yeah.
And you see that a lot in communities too, just like this, how working together, making these fine-tuned adjustments, and then creating this experience where you can move forward collectively. That kind of struck me, this idea that sometimes we think that it's these like major things that have to like happen or whatever, but sometimes it's just these little small adjustments that bring everything into focus or everything into harmony.
Yeah. Well, and it really was amazing. Like I knew, when I kind of planned out this segment, I kind of knew where I was going with it. But there's always some room for, inspiration in the moment and whatnot. Right. And it was just like, it was almost overwhelming, the inspiration, to realize the parallels between, sitting in like a studio orchestra or a symphony or whatever, and being one of those members, right? Like the parallels between being one of those members and then being a member of society, right? Yeah. And music and musicians, music is kind of one of those things where it's actually really similar to the spiritual journey, like this path of inward realization. But young musicians tend to have a very, either like a I'm not nearly good enough and I suck, or like this hugely overcompensated version of I'm amazing, so no one else thinks I suck, right? And so there, in that stage, because I think at some point most musicians go through that stage, it's really easy to be sitting in an ensemble playing music and thinking that someone else is playing something wrong, rather than, okay, how do we make adjustments, right? Because there's a science to music, and then there's definitely an art to music, right? But like the science of music says mathematically speaking, this note is this frequency, it's this wavelength, it's this long, and blah, 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 right? But when you play a note on a trumpet, that same pitch played on a violin is slightly different because the trumpet is tuned the way the trumpet is tuned and the violin is tuned the way that, right? And so mathematically speaking, they're not actually the same note. So we actually have to adjust and literally change tuning because all of the different instruments are, right? Like all of the string instruments tend to tune to each other more easily than instruments outside of different families, right?
Right.
Anyway, so all of this saying it's really easy to sit in the chair and think, well, we're all going to play perfectly in tune. And so when somebody makes a mistake, that's on them and I'm fine. I don't need to do anything because I have my tuner in front of me and I'm directly on pitch. But it's like, yeah, but that's subjective, man. That's, it goes like this. And I think the world around us is really similar to that, where it's really easy to sit at our desk or stand on a street corner and watch or whatever and look at the world and go, well, that's wrong. There's something wrong with that group of people and that thing's an issue. And if they would only just, right? But really it's like, well, but then I am just as much of that issue, if not more. Maybe they're making a mistake, but maybe they're trying to fix it, right? Like sitting in the orchestra, if I'm just going, well, they just played that wrong or they're out of tune and if I refuse to adjust to what they're doing, I'm just as much of an issue as that is. And I think that same thing plays out here. Like the audience doesn't give a shit who made the mistake.
Right.
They just don't
fix
make
it.
the mistake.
Right.
Yeah. How quick can you recover? And that's the art of music, is not that mistakes aren't made. It's how you recover from that mistake quickly enough that nobody even notices.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would probably help a great deal if we kind of, we're going to make mistakes, and hey, let's not even care if we make mistakes, but what do we do when that mistake happens? Or what do we do when something does show up that bumps and grinds? And, how are we playing our part in kind of making those adjustments? And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is, if we only need to make big adjustments when we come from a place of not needing to make adjustments. And then all of a sudden it's too bad that we have to. Right. It's so bad that we have to do something different. If we're constantly making little adjustments along the way, then it's not a big deal.
I just love this idea of comparing this to reality. One, I was thinking about the person that's the rugged individualist that's just kind of there blaring his trumpet and like ignoring everybody else, like you said.
It's always the trumpets, right?
So somebody's off, and here's this, nope, I'm fine. It's just me, and I'm good, and everybody listen to me. And you're like, whoa, dude, you're throwing this whole thing off. We're working together here. Yeah. But then what I really like too is that idea of the dissonance before the resolution. So looking at if we're creating a new way of being on this planet, like we are very strong, and that tension, that dissonance right now is just waiting to resolve. Yeah. So I'm ready for the resolution myself.
Yeah. And I think the way that plays into creating change, right? Like life isn't stagnant, and the mechanism built into life is that dissonant, like that building into dissonance. And that, again, just like music, right? Like dissonance is what moves the music along, because without you need that dissonance to want to make this chord move to the next chord, to the next, to then finally resolve back into, the tonic, whatever, right? Like life is that same way, right? Where we have to have that grinding. When we don't want to move, that grinding is what, this is so uncomfortable. Here you go. Here. Oh, okay, good. Now we got it.
It's like the harmony is the activity of life. That it is this this kind of ebb and flow, and this kind of
the music would
probably talk about this all day.
It would all be pretty boring without that dissonance.
Yeah, I think so.
For this final week of celebrating 31 expressions of the light, I would like to focus on the word community. The reason I want to do this is because I really think that community is the key to us as the human race moving forward and creating the new earth that ultimately works for everyone. Community is the place, the opportunity where we can bridge that divide that has seemed to grow larger and larger. At least looking here within the United States, it certainly seems to be that way. And it's troubling to see how we've gotten to a point where we are finding it very difficult to even begin to communicate our different needs and desires. I believe ultimately we're all looking for the same thing at the core level. We have very different ideas of how to get there, but unless we're able to come together in community and discuss it, we're never going to get there. So I want to compare the micro to the macro. In our own individual lives, the best thing that you can do for yourself to create an enlightened life or a life of more meaning and purpose is to meditate, to go into contemplation, introspection, asking all these deeper questions about yourself. What's important? What's going to matter in 10 years from now? All these different things. We have to get clear on the vision. Ultimately, it comes down to know thyself. The more deeply you know yourself, the more you're able to navigate and have kind of a compass that points you forward going into the future. It's the same thing on a global communal level. We have to be able to know ourselves. And the way to do that is through communication. And that begins in different communities. So as we learn to develop the communities around us, where we are, where we have a sphere of influence, we deepen that bond. Let's again look back at the individual level. In our bodies, we have organs, cells, all these different things that are working together. When one part of that system is hurting, it affects the entire rest of the system. We can't go on if our lungs are failing. The rest of the body, the rest of the organs also fail. It's going to be similar on this planet. When we have large parts of the global whole, if we have a large part that is not functioning, that is in pain and suffering, it affects the whole. It is in our best interest to listen to those parts that need more, to learn how to communicate and come together in global community. Ultimately, we are one community. So as we get to know ourselves, lean in, ask those questions, ask what's important, and then also recognizing that the most important thing from somebody who is intentionally wanting to create the global community that works for everyone is we have to set the example by being the bigger person, asking these questions and sitting back and listening with curiosity, with an open mind, and just allowing people to express their own takes on life. Have you ever noticed how when you have your strong, firm opinions, we get into our little bubbles and we share these ideas with each other and they flow out of our mouth very easily. But as soon as somebody outside of that bubble is present and you have to try to express what it is that you feel, suddenly the words that used to work don't work quite the same. We have to reframe it. We have to think about how it's going to be received. It makes us become very clear on what it is that we really believe and really desire, without all the blame, the pointing fingers, and the name calling. So as we learn how to broaden ourselves within different communities, finding where there is a divide that we can try to bridge, that's starting the overall consciousness moving towards that direction. And we can all individually do this right where we are, but it takes an intention to be freeing of others from judgment, to be open-minded, to be listening, creating deeper communities all around us. It will grow and grow until we learn how to truly become curious about one another. Right now, we are one global community, but it feels like we are divided against ourselves. And we know, just like the human body, that can't go on forever. So setting this intention, being open-minded, and leaning in and listening to find out what others really care about. As Brene Brown said, it is really hard to hate someone up close. So lean in.
It has been 0 days since the Brene Brown reference.
0 days, yes.
You know what stuck out to me about that, because when we talk about community, it is this kind of like external sort of, all right, we're this one community, getting to know each other, things like this. But the thing that really struck me was you talked about knowing yourself. And I think that that's something that we forget about. We forget about this kind of explorative, like introspective sort of awareness, and how that shows up in community. And so when we have those aspects of ourselves that are unobserved or haven't been looked at or reflected upon, we can live out those areas in a community setting and really not necessarily do that in a very graceful way. And so when we are introspective and looking at those areas, looking at those opportunities for growth, looking at those triggers, looking at those things that prick us, and really understanding why, then we can begin to heal those things or look at those things differently, and then shift and then bring that shift to this community instead of like working out our hurt on people. We're kind of knowing ourselves, getting our own sort of house in somewhat of an order, and then we're able to then bring our authentic selves to community. So I really like that aspect of knowing ourselves, how that is like an integral part of community and what it means to be in community, what it means to show up in community, what it means to live in community, love in community. And so that was something I hadn't thought about it, but it really that is important. Otherwise, we can't show up authentically if we are not looking at those aspects of ourselves.
Yeah. And there's such a fine balance there between, I can easily see going like this introspective route and then going so far and losing all confidence.
Right.
or I think what we're seeing a lot of is the other extreme of that, turning it into that rugged individual. It's all about me, but not actually, like there's that middle balance kind of thing, right? And Chris, I love what you said about that idea of it's really easy to spout off all our opinions when we're in that safe circle. But as soon as someone who doesn't share that opinion is there, we're like, but you know. And what's really interesting about that, like you said at some point, really at the core, we all want the same thing, but we think we have such different ideas of how to get there. And I think a lot of that really just comes down to how we're trained to think about things, how we're told to think about things, the things that we've like absorbed about how to say we think about things. Because so much of that, we all know that circle of people that just talk smack about other people all the time, right? Like that's how their relationship is built. It's on talking about other people. And that's a really easy space to fall into. And yet I think all of that is just because we're not trained how to actually think about how we feel or think about what we're thinking about, So like we just kind of spout off the languaging that comes really naturally. And, of course, that's, if you hear your parents talking that way, that's the language you're around. That's what you grow up with. That's what you spout off, right? We kind of have that generational thing. A lot of it's that. But, I think even a lot about what we are doing as this community. And so often there's not really word. Like we are having to think so intentionally about a lot of the language we're using so much of the time, because we're like the first ones in a lot of places, at least within our circles, to start kind of venturing off into what do we really think about this? What does this really mean? Within science of mind, there's kind of been this standardized languaging around a lot of things that, at least for me, I feel like we're starting to outgrow or have outgrown. And so there is so much energy that goes into like redefining things and especially this month, right? Like picking a word, like we're going to do a whole segment on one word. It's like, what does this word really mean? Oh my God, we have no idea. We think it means this thing and it's really the exact opposite or whatever. It's anyway, that whole idea of it being challenging when someone with differing opinions shows up. Because I think a lot of the time for a lot of us, that opinion we're spouting is not really the thing. That's just like those words are the vehicle we're using to try and just kind of get out these feelings around something, but we don't even have the language for what it is. So we just use, local news says this, so it's blah 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 blah, right?
Right.
Is that really what we mean? You know.
Mm-hmm. I think that really ties right back to Rev Ryan and the idea of know thyself, because when you've gone in and you've done the introspection and to see like what makes you tick, and see how like some of the mistakes that I've made in my life are very similar to the things that I'm getting angry at other people for. And so the more you know about that, then the more you're able to show up in just kind of a compassion, curious way and be like, all right, I can come here without bringing massive amounts of judgment, hopefully.
Yeah.
Easier said than done sometimes.
And pain and all, yeah.
Almost. Yeah. Well, and I think we talk about it too, that people are our mirror. And so then that's what I think sometimes where it's really easy to have sometimes this kind of peaceful experience when I'm in my home, but then when I step out and have to people, then it's like, oh, okay. Then those lessons become very evident. The rough edges, my rough edges rub up against your rough edges. And so I think that instead of running away from those edges, maybe embracing them. And I think we can't do that unless we've actually looked at them and recognize, oh, that's a rough edge and your edge is pushing that, but that's okay. It's showing me something. Yeah. It's pointing me towards something. And that something is a greater awareness of myself, a greater awareness where I have maybe layered stuff in my vision where I can't see the truth of who I am. And it's really an opportunity. I think community is a wonderful opportunity, albeit challenging sometimes to do that.
And I just want to, one last thing on that. I think that this is a really new concept for a vast majority of people in the world, right? Like we're not trained. I say trained. We're not domesticated. We're not taught. We're not raised to do anything like any of this. I mean, very few people in the world, in the United States, I don't know, are raised in a parenting style or just a way of life that actually says, hey, why don't you just pause and take a minute let's actually talk about how you feel, right?
Right.
We're taught that harmony in the world should look like this perfect imagery, and it should just happen. It's a thing. It's a way of being, not an activity, right? And there shouldn't ever be any dissonance, and it's all great, right? And all the stuff we're talking about here, it's like total opposite of, right, I think, what most of us have grown up with, have lived with for many, many years. So, if you're someone watching and this feels really strange, it is.
It is.
It's just not. Yeah, it is.
It is strange.
It's just, it really is such the opposite of how most of the world operates.
Yeah. Well, welcome once again to Truth Be Told. We're so glad that you're here. So we're not done yet. Just a brief interlude to kind of let you know there's so many ways to get involved in this community. Now, of course, if you're watching now, you know that we have Truth Be Told at 7:00 on Tuesdays. And this is an opportunity for us to talk about some topics that are really near and dear to us and explore them in new and practical ways. Wednesday night, we have Unwind Wednesdays. It's our meditation practice. That is at 8:30. And then Thursdays is the gathering. It's an opportunity to come together and kind of a small group, sort of more intimate setting where we can see each other's faces and talk a little bit more about these topics and share from our own personal experience. And it's been a really deep and profound experience for everyone that's been involved. And we have on Sundays at 12:30 our Strip Down Sunday. And this is not exactly what you think it is. It is actually an opportunity for you just to come and listen to a brief inspirational message, really giving us an opportunity to really explore these topics in an even different sort of way with our own SEC spin to it. So to get involved or learn about any of these things, go to our website, soulevolutioncollaborative.org. You can sign up for these events. You can get more information about these events. You can also see some evergreen content that's on our website. More to come. There's also going to be more to come in our Sunday experience in the new year. So for more information, soulevolutioncollaborative.org. Now back to the show. Have you ever had this experience where you have heard
a spiritual principle or a teaching or a practice like over and over and over again. And you kind of get it in your mind that, well, my goodness, I know this, I've experienced this hundreds of times, but then you experience it like the 312th time and something clicks, something new, something that you hadn't seen before, and then everything kind of comes together. And then you realize that you've just kind of been skating the surface of an idea or a principle. Well, that's been my experience, especially these past few months, around this idea of wholeness. Now, prior, I kind of had this idea of wholeness as something's broken, so we make it whole, or we heal it, or make it complete. And whereas that may be a little bit of it, I have begun to understand wholeness as this idea of the entirety of our experience. So often we like to see, we label things in our life, good things or bad things or desirable things or undesirable things or healed things or unhealed things or broken things and fixed things. You get the idea. These kind of polar opposites or this understanding. Well, this idea of wholeness in its truest form is understanding that all of those experiences are a part of the whole. And when we talk about whole, we talk about this life, this divine essence, this thing that we are the individualized expressions of. And so that is represented in all of our experiences, whether they're experiences that we enjoy at the time or experiences that we would rather not happen. All these things are serving a purpose. Each is a piece of a puzzle, and I know that's kind of cliche, especially in spiritual communities, but it really is true. That each of these experiences of our lives, although we can't see it at the time often, at least in my experience, it's hard to see it when you're in it, but when we step back and really can look at our life, our experiences as the totality of this divine essence, then we begin to see each and every experience as a thing that has been pushing us or guiding us into our greatest expression. And so who we are today is reflective of the things that we've learned yesterday. And who we will be tomorrow are reflective of the things that we are experiencing today. And so when we can look at it from that perspective, when we can look at it, then we maybe can release a little bit of judgment over the events of our lives and be able to see them for what they are. That there's always something going on. That everything is a part of this experience that we call life. And what we know about life is that it is infused, fueled, guided, funded, maintained, sustained by that one thing. That there really is only one thing going on. There's not the good things and the bad things, but there's one thing going on. And that thing that's always kind of waiting in the wings, kind of like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain, even though we know this is not a man, but this presence, that thing that's always just whispering in the background, guiding us and moving us forward into that deeper and deeper understanding of who we are. Not moving us forward in the fact that we have to be better than we are today. Instead, all that we already have. It's not doing the right things to get something, but instead it is this evolution is this kind of peeling back the layers and really seeing our own wholeness. And that is reflected in all that we experience. It's reflected in all that we come in contact with each and every day. And so the more that we can release our grip on labeling things as good or bad, or we want that, we don't want that, and the more that we can allow things to be as they are, the more this gentle flow of this experience of wholeness can outpicture in our lives. And we'll see that wholeness is not something that something that's wrong with us that had to be fixed, but instead wholeness is stepping into the totality of our lives.
I would just like to point out, it never ceases to amaze me, the divine organization of things, right? So before the start of the month, we went and like by chance spun a wheel and decided, let chance or divine timing, however you want to look at it, decide which words would be on which days of the month, right? And then throughout the month, each week, the words that were presented that week, we each went and picked one of those words and then came together and said, oh, this is the word I'm going to talk on, right? Holy cow. The way, I mean, they won't believe us when we tell them we didn't plan all of this.
Right.
The way that these words so perfectly overlap and the way the conversation builds, even just tonight, talking about this, it's like, oh yeah, wholeness. Of course, that's what we land on. Of course, that's what we're talking, right? The whole thing from the harmony and the dissonance, the way we rub up against things, but that's what moves us into how we show up as community, into the whole personal, introspection, right? Into like, into wholeness of, we have to, all of it is the thing. Wow. Anyway, no one's going to believe us that we didn't orchestrate and plan all of this. It's amazing. It really is.
I learned that it's just, it's everything. And I didn't really think it as pivotal as it has showed up for me this year. But like everything goes back to wholeness. Like if I can, like that's begin to start, that has clicked and that has just shifted so many other areas. That this really just beautiful, gentle sort of understanding of what that means. And that's really shifted a lot of things.
It is mind-blowing to me, just going back to that idea of like, how we talk when we're in our bubble and then how that's slightly different when we're outside of our bubble, and thinking about wholeness as it, pertains to community, that, so many people are quick to like, this would be a lot better, a lot easier if these people didn't exist. If these people weren't out there doing this, and recognizing, like in that one global community, there is like nowhere else for them to go. Like we have to recognize that we are all in this together, and the ways of the past that have tried to, draw lines on the map and say, you go over there can act like this and we'll do it our way over here. And like, we're so interconnected now through technology, through our realizations, that none of that works anymore. It's now at a place like, okay, we just have to admit that we are one whole thing here. And
no more pretending. And I don't know that it ever worked, but it was easy enough to pretend before, right? Like, But what's really interesting about that too, Chris, is it's so easy to see now how, to stand on that pedestal and say, oh, if only this group, blah, blah, blah. But being the one on the side, like to the side of the pedestal, looking up at the one on the pedestal, it's so easy to see how, wow, actually the people you're talking about aren't really the problem. You on the pedestal become the problem. And so now the rest of us are trying to figure out, how do we address the real problem, right? It's like the problem is not the thing we're pointing the finger at. The problem is when I'm pointing fingers, I become the problem. Is, and it is a matter of, do I have enough of that self reflection to look at and go, oh, and that's hard. I mean, I think that's really hard because we all have our bias about something, right? We all have unconscious thoughts and beliefs about, and conscious thoughts and beliefs about something that put us up on the pedestal, pointing fingers out at something else, right? And it's challenging to realize when we're the ones doing that, that the thing we're pointing at, and it may really seem to us like that thing is an issue.
Oh yeah.
But the bigger issue is when we start getting loud and proud about that thing's an issue, then we actually become a bigger issue than the thing we're trying to point our fingers at.
Well, and also if we look at those experiences and those things like that we see in the world, or we just see in our own lives, that we're like, well, that's crap. But isn't it interesting? Like, and we've seen this collectively, globally too, when there have been those pivotal moments in history, whether it's pivotal moments of like collective grief or collective trauma, Like those things are crappy and we don't want them to happen. But isn't it interesting? Like surrounding those events, there becomes this uplifting of consciousness, of passion, for standing up for the truth, or this just newfound sense of community. So it's like it is like all these things are just nudging us towards this evolution kind of ball is rolling. And without that dissonance, without that kind of whatever, then there would not necessarily be that push to grow and to expand and to transform and to shift. And so I think that when we can see those things and appreciate them and appreciate what it stirs up in us, then our energy can be then guided towards, oh yes, I need to stand up and do something, instead of look at those people, they are doing like shitty things. I can step up and say, okay, what's mine to do in this? This is stirring something within me. It's stirring, whether it's a gift or a passion or something that I want to stand up for the truth, and it stirs. And then if we can stand in that, then that's where the change happens, instead of the energy focused on the thing itself. And that happens like on a micro level and a macro level, but it's that energy, if we can really get on board with what that stirs, because I think we do see that. We see that a lot in these collective experiences.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note too, like, you know, to bring this back to the bigger picture of wholeness, that all of this exists within the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And again, back to, because of the way we were all domesticated and raised and have now lived for however long, it seems like the norm to treat things the way we have been treating them, that we point fingers and call out groups and they're the problem and we're not. But in reality, like in real reality, we really have to get used to recognizing that those situations happen because someone or a group of people are in pain, are in distress. Mm-hmm. And we as a society have not been taught how to talk about that. We haven't been taught, or even how to recognize it. Like, do we even recognize ourselves that we are in pain or distress and essentially lashing out because of it? Mm-hmm. And so to see a group reacting out of this or living out of this, it's not to say, oh, you know, let's point fingers because look at how this is happening. Right. It's to be compassionate and go, oh, wow, what has happened to cause this? How do we change this? How do we shift this? And then also in reaction, it's really interesting how this happens, right? So in reaction to groups doing things that we look at, and, you know, groups of other groups, and like how many ways can we divide up society into different groups, right? This group looks at that group, and this group's in lashing out in pain, and this group looks at them and goes, well, they're wrong, and we should just, you know, I don't know, boot them out or something, right? And so they're in pain, and it shows up this way. And now this group is reacting in pain, and it shows up this other way. Like, no, like, can we stop? You know, we really have to get good at recognizing the pain, like, and this is going back to what we were saying before about knowing yourself well enough to like, oh, this is not actually what I am lashing out because of such and such.
And it goes even further back into the harmony that, you know, everybody's pointing at, like, there's that one person played the wrong note. They did it. They messed up this whole song, as opposed to saying like, whoa, how can we adjust and how do we cover it quick enough for that person that nobody will know? Right. How do we collectively make that adjustment instead of like standing up in the middle of the concert saying, you did it again, you played that wrong note? Or, you know.
You're bringing back like old middle school memories of me being the one alto clarinet that was not doing the right thing. I can guarantee I was the one not playing the right thing. Such was the end of my band career.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty amazing the breadth of wholeness, like how much that encompasses, and when you really understand that well. I know we always talk about how we're a teaching of oneness.
Oh.
But what's oneness without wholeness?
I mean, yeah. Wholeness is where it's at.
Yeah. And I love one. I mean, I love the idea of oneness, but I
Yeah.
think maybe it's just a matter of maybe we spend the next year on oneness and we have the same experience. I don't know, but
maybe.
Yeah, wholeness has come up a lot this year, and it definitely, like you said, it has been very moving,
Yeah,
and life shifting to recognize the whole of the one.
yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. All right. So thank you for tuning in and playing along with us. And hopefully this has been inspirational to you and maybe even life-changing in some way. We know for a fact, it is our fact that we have the best job in the world, and that is doing this and bringing this inspiration to the world, bringing this message out into the world. And we could not imagine ourselves doing literally anything else. So thank you for being here with us to be part of that. And if in any way you are able to support this mission, we are supported by donations from folks like you. And so if you are able to do that, please head over to, let me bring up the banner here in a minute. Where to go? There it is. You can head over to Soul Evolution Collaborative. There is a donate button in the menu. All donations are tax deductible, as we are currently in outreach of the Orlando Center for Spiritual Living. So again, we're certainly grateful for all of your gifts, because that is what keeps us going. Funding wise, our source is not the funds, but certainly the bank account is funded by donations. So we greatly appreciate that. We also appreciate if you are looking to be involved in other ways, you can certainly jump on over to soulevolutioncollaborative.org and check out all the things that Reverend Ryan talked about earlier. Our Tuesday night video, Wednesday meditation, Thursday night gathering, Sunday strip down Sundays, and very soon, I know we keep saying this, but I actually feel it coming, that very soon we will be launching another group gathering activity on Sunday evenings. So more to come on that very shortly. Thank you once again for tuning in with us. And for some of you, we will see you Thursday. And for everyone else, we will see you next week.